vengeance!
Hit the pace car! What for? Because you hit every other damn thing out there. I want you to be perfect.
When I'm driving, I got a guy on the radio who talks to me. It's him. He talks to me.
Well, I wanna be a race car driver. Pretty girls eating from my hand, yeah. Wanna live a life of fun and danger. No sweat working for the man, alright. Well, I wanna be a firefighter. Cool-headed when the heat is on, yeah. Save my baby from the burning building. Take all the work sleepless on, alright.
No, he didn't slam you, he didn't bump you, he didn't nudge you. He rubbed you. And rubbing, son, is racing.
Hey, race fans, welcome to the Hoobazoo Radio Network and welcome to Drafting the Circuits. My name is Frank Santoroski. I'll be your host for the next hour as we go over everything racing, this being our last official show of the 2018 season. Tonight we'll do a 2-hour broadcast to recap everything in 2018 and preview 2019. Now, let me introduce you to the panel I have assembled tonight. With me, as always, Mr. Gray Warren from Richard Childress Racing. From IndyCar.com, Joey Barnes is in the house. From Eau Rouge Engineering, Richard Youden is with us, and the NASCAR correspondent at Motorsports Tribune, Mr. Seth Eggert, also with us tonight. How is everybody?
Doing great.
Good.
Very good, thank you.
All right, great to talk to you guys. So, 2018 drawing to a close. Christmas decorations are up all around town. People are hustling, bustling, shopping in the mall. Snow is on the ground here in my hometown. But it's time to take a look back on the year. Interesting year we had. We crowned 5-time champions in both Formula One and IndyCar. We crowned a first-time champion in NASCAR. We saw Austin Dillon take the win in Daytona 500, while Will Power took the Indy 500. And Kyle Busch won the Coca-Cola 600 in some of the major races there. We saw IndyCar introduce Robert Wickens as one of the brightest rookies we've seen ever. And then we saw his season cut short by devastating injury. Another first this year, we saw Formula One introduce the Halo. We saw the IndyCar Universal Body Kit on the track for the first time. We saw the introduction of Chevrolet's Camaro as a NASCAR chassis. We saw the Charlotte Roval debut as a race in the chase to a very exciting event there. We saw first-time winners in Eric Jones and Chase Elliott. And we saw some lasts here. We saw Kimi Räikkönen end his tenure at Ferrari. We saw Fernando Alonso say goodbye to Formula One. We saw Danica Patrick's farewell tour that kind of fizzled out. We're going to see the end of the Motorsports trinity of Jimmy, Chad, and Lowe's Home Improvement Center will no longer be together. Along the way, we also said goodbye to Dan Gurney, Deanne Andretti, Mary Holman George, David Pearson, and James Hilton this year. So just a lot has happened in the world of racing this year. I mean, all that and more, and we'll discuss as much of that as we can get to. But before we start recapping the year, there was one last race in Abu Dhabi for the Formula One series there. Lewis Hamilton took the win ahead of Sebastian Vettel. Vettel had a pretty quiet day. We were joking that it looked like Will Smith got more screen time than Vettel. But in a way, Hamilton taking the win and Vettel barely, being there but not able to catch is kind of a microcosm for the way the whole season went down. We had a season that began with unprecedented 2 4-time champions in the series at the same time, both with a good shot at a 5th title to see who would get there first. And, Lewis answered that early on and often in the season, did he not, Richard?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it was... you want to see... Look at... if nobody'd watched any race this season and look at the points total now at the end of the season, they would have said it was a dominant, another dominant Mercedes season. But I don't know what you guys think, but it didn't have that feel for long periods of the year. There was a stretch in the middle over the summer there where you genuinely didn't know who was going to win the race week in, week out. And there was probably 4 or 5 races in a row stretching from around Silverstone through to Monza, where the guy in the fastest car didn't necessarily win the race, which was great for the sport. It really created some excitement and some unknowns, which you probably haven't seen in Formula One for a long time. At the end of the day, there Mercedes sort of did pull away and claim the fifth title for Hamilton and fifth consecutive constructors title. So it probably went as expected in the grand scheme of things, but it was a great season to watch, I think, and it sows the seed quite nicely, I think, for 2019. And as you mentioned, with some of those changes, Alonso leaving and Raikkonen dropping back to Sauber, and guys like Charles Leclerc coming up and Pierre Gasly going into the Red Bull for a full-time ride next year, and Lando Norris joining the grid, and George Russell. There's some potential there, and it's quite exciting. You want to see a revival by Williams and the work that
and not to mention Robert Kubica back in the sport too.
Oh, fantastic! Yeah. I mean, that was as you say, confirmed. And you look at the guy deserves huge amount of credit. I mean, what he's been through and to get to where he is now is incredible. It's if you look in the sporting realm, 2018 has been year of the comeback. You look what Tiger Woods has done in golf and how he's re-energized that sport in many ways. I know Kubica's not quite on the same level, but what he's achieved is remarkable.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. So it'll be interesting to see how he performs in that car. And you're talking this is an underperforming team, and they've got a young rookie as their lead driver.
Yeah.
So and having an experienced guy like Robert in there is only going to help to elevate George Russell's indoctrination into Formula One, to have somebody that he can lean on with good advice. So,
and at the end of the day, there's 20 seats in Formula One. You don't get one of those seats without deserving it, and Frank and Claire are not going to put somebody in their car that does not justify that seat, especially somebody who isn't bringing money. Now, there were obviously, Robert will bring cash to the team, there's no doubt about that, but he certainly won't be bringing the sort of money that Lance Stroll and Sergei Sorokin bought. The terms of the George Russell deal will be interesting. Maybe there's a break on their engine supply for next year, as was with as they achieved when Valtteri Bottas went over to Mercedes. Part of that deal, compensation for breaking Bottas' contract, was a reduced engine supply for at least one season, if not two. So that may be part of the deal as well, to bring money into the team in a way without necessarily directly bringing it. So, you got to give the guy credit. Yeah,
so now in the race itself, we saw Lewis stop very early on.
Yep.
Very early on. And then it was just a matter of time. He just kind of patiently waited for the race to come back to him. He was a little aggressive on his outlap, and then they just seemed to settle into a pace. And then Ricciardo stopped amazingly late. He held the lead into the late stages as there was some weather coming in. Even for a time, it started to sprinkle on the backstretch. And I really feel like the Red Bull was probably just holding out for that it would rain pretty hard, because when it does rain in that area, it rains pretty hard, pretty quickly, and then it goes away. But it would, if it would have been hard enough for everyone to have to run in to get intermediates, that would have put Ricciardo right on the same pit strategy with everybody else and given him a shot at the podium for sure, perhaps the win. But without the rain, there was very little drama in the race, other than the incident with Hulkenberg at the start.
Yeah, the Hulkenberg incident was a little bit clumsy. I think he was going around. I think it was around the side of Grosjean at turns, was it 8 and 9 there on the back at the end of the back straight. And he genuinely said he just didn't see him when he turned into the apex, which was a little bit clumsy and messy, really. Nothing more than that. I mean, there's been far more dramatic rollover incidents in the last few years. I mean, it was a little bit spectacular, but I don't think there was ever any real concern for his safety, thankfully, the way these cars are made these days. But on the race, on the Ricciardo situation, it was a shame, really, they couldn't try and push it for 5 more laps, maybe, and then send him back out on the hyper-soft or hyper-mega uber-soft, whatever they call it these days. Just to see if he could have really gone and put some, really fast laps in there to try and put a bit of pressure on the guys in front of him, because that would have been, That would have made it a little bit more exciting. In a way, when they pitted him, it was just like, oh, okay, well there goes that then. Everybody was building it up, so it was a shame they didn't throw take a bit of a gamble there and see if they could have done something at the end. But it was, for Abu Dhabi, it wasn't a bad race. It's not a Spa or a Monza or a Silverstone, is it?
No, it wasn't bad at all. As a matter of fact, I hadn't had the opportunity to watch an entire Formula One broadcast start to finish this year. I've watched bits and pieces of them through the year, or sometimes just caught the highlights. But I had the opportunity. I had the entire day free on Sunday, so I was able to watch the whole thing start to finish, including all the pre-race and stuff. And I'll tell you what, Richard, I was pretty happy with the coverage from Sky Sports. I know that their initial race with ESPN had some technical difficulties, and it ran in, they took took a beating on social media, but from what I saw there, I thought it was quite excellent coverage there. But you could tell Liberty's influence in there, because we did have to keep seeing what Will Smith was up to time and time again. So,
and ironically, he wouldn't be interviewed at the start of the race.
Yes, yeah, he said, I don't know enough about cars. Don't talk to me. Yeah, so
yeah, it's like, oh, okay, but no,
but we did get to see in the grid walk Billy Monger there on his artificial legs. We were talking about this in the pre-show. He was there to do his FIA test to see how quickly he can get out of a car that's fitted with a halo, and he passed that test amazingly. He got out of the car in 3 seconds, so which means he's good to run Formula 3 next year, I guess, which is his goal. So, but he looked none the worse for wear and in really good spirits. He was doing the grid walk, helping interview folks, huh? Oh
yeah, I mean the guy's certainly what an 18 months it's been for the kid. It's a roller coaster, I'm sure, but as you say, an inspirational guy there, and hopefully they can, he'll do well next year, and continue that trend, and inspire other people who've had some pretty horrific accidents and injuries. So yeah, good luck to him. It'll be good to see how he gets on.
You had a chance to watch the Formula One race. You're a big Kimi guy. He wrapped up his season with Ferrari, and he was one of the first DNFs of the race there, but end of an era for Kimi there. But what are your, going into Sauber, and just looking at, honestly, Sauber was really strong at the beginning of this particular race here. Leclerc had a great start, so let's talk about what the future holds for Kimi, for Sauber, and then for his new teammate.
So do you want me to talk about Kimi? Let's talk about Kimi, shall we? I think Sauber have been the most impressive team of the season, without a doubt. You look at where they were in Australia, to look at where they are now, consistently scoring points. I mean, Charles Leclerc was mixing it with the Red Bulls and the Ferraris at the start of the race, and he got the wrong end of the deal, I think, with the that safety car, that virtual safety car, after those instances early in the race, and probably pitted out of sequence there and pushed him to the back. But I think Raikkonen can do wonders with Sauber next year. I think they could be really, really strong.
Yeah, sorry, I had technical difficulties there, Frank. So, yeah, just to kind of back up a little bit of what Richard said, I do think that Sauber's getting a gem with Kimi. I think a couple of things that come to mind is they're getting Ferrari's most recent race winner. They're also getting the most recent world champion that Ferrari's had. So, that's kind of a nice little feather in the cap, so to speak. But I think the biggest thing that I take from this is that when you see the energy that Kimi comes with, you see some of the video and the highlights of just him kind of mingling with the people in the pit area. You could tell that he wants to be at Sauber, and there seems to be a little bit of a motivation factor that I managed to catch over the last couple of days that maybe wasn't there at Ferrari. Because there's Richard, you could probably speak to this. I mean, whenever you get around those big environments, the amount of just constant eyeballs that are on you and the amount of pressure is just exorbitant. So it's just, I feel like this is a good situation for both Sauber and for Kimi, and I think that they're going to be primed to give a consistent run at maybe even top fives next year. I mean, He wanted this test, and it was mostly, as he said, he wanted to get on with the program because he needed to find out where the shortcomings were now so they could work on them over the off season. And I think that speaks to just the fact that people think that maybe he doesn't necessarily care so much. I think this is showing everybody that he really wants this challenge, and I think they're going to do wonders together next year.
Yep. No, without a doubt, I think the novelty of being at Ferrari probably worn a little bit thin on Kimi. We all remember what was going, the sort of atmosphere when he left Ferrari the first time in 2008, 2009.
Yeah.
It was, it was just he doesn't care for all the pomp and ceremony that goes on at Ferrari sometimes. I think he's going to, on a personal level, flourish at Sauber, just being out of the way, doing what he does, not having anybody bothering him, just going out, enjoying himself, not doing all the sponsorship commitments and all that sort of stuff. I think he'll thrive.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. Yeah. So, but go ahead, Joey.
Well, I was just going to say, y'all were talking about Kubica earlier and Williams, and I don't want to go rehash another 20 minutes on that or anything, but I think my 2 cents on it are the fact that I think Williams is going to be 10 million times better with Kubica.
Oh, sure.
A lot of reasons being, maybe they lack the money that you get with Stroll, but certainly Stroll can't develop a car. If anything, we saw over the last 2 years, the car was in complete decline, even with the money. So from this, you get Kubica, who's been working on the development side of things the entire year, and you get to throw him in, and everything that they've developed, everything that they've worked on, they get to put to use next year with the guy that they were doing it with all along. And George Russell is an incredible talent. And I think that when you put those two things together, a seasoned veteran next to a guy like George Russell, I think they're going to thrive, regardless of what you see in terms of numbers. I just think in terms of a direction, them and Paddy Lowe, I think everything's moving forward for Williams. And it's really interesting because you could almost look at this next year. This year it was obvious. Williams was the weakest team on the grid by a very wide margin, whereas Sauber had filled that role a few years back. I think when we start to look at this grid next year and the year after, you've really got to wonder who is going to be the worst team, because it's hard to pick out just the absolute crappiest team out of anybody because everybody is so close in the midfield.
Yeah, the midfield battles are sometimes more compelling than what's going on at the front of the race. I mean, when you consider, I believe it was it 2012 or 2013 was the last time that a car won the race that wasn't a Ferrari, Red Bull, or Mercedes?
It was Maldonado, wasn't it?
No, Kimi won. Kimi won in the Lotus.
Yeah, it was 2013.
2013. Yeah, so
right.
you're talking.
Yep.
Yeah, it's so 6 years, right? So
yeah, and there's been two in the last two seasons. In the last 2 seasons, there's been 2 podiums by none of no cars in the top 3 teams. Stroll got 3rd in Azerbaijan last year, and Perez got 3rd in Azerbaijan this year. Outside of that, it's always been Ferrari, Mercedes, or Red Bull on the podium. That's not good for the sport, really.
No, it's not good for the sport. But I mean, as we see these midfield and backfield teams improve, we've got to start bridging that gap between the top 3 and the midfield. But right now we're seeing the bridging the gap between the hangers on at the back.
Yeah.
It can only. Somebody's eventually got to break through, whether it be Renault, whether it be Haas, whether it be Force India, Stroll Racing, whatever they call that now. It would be good to see a breakthrough win from somebody there. And I even believe that Liberty is dying to see that themselves. So
I'm going to tell you right now, I think that the team in the worst shape next year is probably Racing Point Force India. And it's just simply because, and I know I'm hating on the guy right now, but it's simply because you've got a guy behind the wheel and Lance Stroll, yet to be officially confirmed, but regardless, which is kind of funny, you'd figure his dad would confirm him pretty quick. But I just look at that as a situation where the lack of development and the lack of tools and resources, they're going to slowly go down the pecking order on the grid, whereas teams like Haas are going to continue to improve. I mean, I'm incredibly happy with what I've seen out of Haas in 3 years, and I think that you're looking at a team based on some of the conversations I've had with a few people and based on kind of the mindset and the business philosophy. I think they could battle for fourth place in constructors next year.
Yeah, that would be outstanding. Yeah. Now,
I think Toro Rosso will struggle next year. You look at their driver lineup, and that's not particularly strong.
Yeah, I could see that. I mean, Albon is not very particularly strong. I know he did great in F2, but you know what? Mick Schumacher is going to wipe the floor with a lot of people next year in F2 since he's gotten confirmed with Prima. I mean, by the time the new regulations hit, Mick Schumacher is going to be in Formula One. It'll be interesting to see if he's in a Ferrari right out of the gate or if they put him on a Sauber route.
Mercedes.
Ooh, yeah.
Yeah. Schumacher's got ties to Mercedes as well. Yeah, let's not forget that. So, so off track. After the race, we had this interesting promotional event. Another ride swap. We've seen these in the past. They're always fun, but it was Jimmy Johnson and Fernando Alonso out there. Now, what circuit were they at, Richard? It wasn't Abu Dhabi.
No, it was Bahrain.
It was Bahrain.
I don't know if it was the full. I guess it probably was the full circuit at Bahrain. Looking at the lap times.
Right. So we used a 5-year-old Formula One car. The one from the prior engine package. Something I guess McLaren has in there for demonstrations and whatnot. And then they brought the Lowe's Chevy. They flew it over there and, brought all the pit crews, a lot of fanfare. But at the end of the day, they said Johnson's times were impressive in the F1 car. He was within a couple of tenths of Alonso's time. But then Alonso gets in the stock car and pretty much blows Jimmy away. He was, Seth, what did you say,
About 3 seconds.
3 full seconds faster in an unfamiliar car. Now, to Jimmy's credit, this is a very unfamiliar circuit, very, very unfamiliar type of circuit. I mean, even, the Sonoma and Watkins Glen where Jimmy's done road racing is not very similar to a Formula One circuit. So, but what are your guys' thoughts with this whole I know it's all done for fun and all done for press, but now we've got McLaren is wondering if maybe they'd like to put Alonso in a couple of NASCAR road races. Jimmy Johnson is saying maybe he wouldn't mind running an IndyCar street race or two. So, I mean, do these sort of things kind of actually lead to this, or is this just idle talk because a reporter asked that question?
It's fun everybody wants to come to IndyCar all of a sudden over the last couple of years, huh? Imagine how much NASCAR executives had to cringe whenever they saw Jimmy Johnson wants to run some street course or road course races in IndyCar. You're 7-time champion, ladies and gentlemen. But, I think look, at the end of the day, they're racers. And us, reporters, journalists, what have you, we always... most of us, I'd like to think, our big interest is just seeing the overall health of the sport, and that's all motorsports. And I think that it's kind of cool whenever you get this kind of mixture. This is a similar thing that we saw with, I think it was Montoya, and was it Montoya and Gordon?
Yes.
Montoya
Yes.
Okay.
Montoya and Gordon, and then it was Stewart and Hamilton.
Yeah. So.
Right, and then the results of the Montoya Gordon thing was Montoya ended up coming over to NASCAR.
Exactly. Yeah, but I mean, look, I don't think Alonso's going to come over here and run 36 NASCAR races. I mean,
but can you imagine him at the Xfinity race at Road America, or at Watkins Glen in a Cup car? I sure can see that.
I don't think I could see Xfinity because I think at the end of the day, I mean, let's be honest. You're looking at Fernando Alonso. Why are you going to put him in an Xfinity car when you could just take him to the big stage right away? I mean, I don't. Watkins Glen maybe, but not Sonoma. I mean, honestly.
I didn't say Sonoma. I said Road America, and I said Watkins Glen.
Unless they put him in the Xfinity car and the Cup car at Watkins Glen just to make it a bigger weekend.
Yeah, right. We'll see how that works. I mean, Alonso gets to kind of pick and choose what he wants to do, and I think that he's certainly earned that right. Being one of the all-time legends of Formula One, I think it's cool that we finally run into an era where people are interested. And we hadn't had that. We certainly haven't had it during the social media age of things. And the fact that suddenly we're seeing some F1 guys cross over to IndyCar, and we've seen Montoya go to NASCAR, and there's a lot of fluidity there. Maybe something could come out of this, but I think the better thing you're looking at is probably WEC and sports car races, because that's the happy medium of anything that's open wheel and anything that's complete stock car. And, as we learned yesterday, actually, Alonso's running with Kamui Kobayashi over at Wayne Taylor Racing. So that little jest of Johnson and Alonso for the Rolex 24 or sports car race in general isn't going to happen, at least for another year from the looks of it.
Now, has Jimmy ever run the Rolex 24?
He has.
Yeah.
Multiple times.
I think he's finished second, doesn't he?
know, yeah.
I think he's placed in it.
He finished on the podium at least once.
I mean, I think it speaks quite highly of, and I don't think it was ever in question, Jimmy Johnson's professionalism, the way he sort of manages himself. He didn't just rock up to do this. He went for a whole day in the simulator at McLaren in Woking. And, he's put a lot of effort into this. He didn't just turn up and do it, off the cuff sort of thing. And, Jimmy's that sort of guy anyway. He does, handle himself with a very, highest possible level of sort of respect, if you like, about his own ability. He's not going to do something like this and not put effort in. But, I think it's great to get that, exposure for both sports in both other, arenas. I
mean, I think what's funny about this is I'm kind of wondering to kind of somewhat answer your question, Frank. I feel like this might be a scouting project for Jimmy Johnson, and that's only if this next year is a complete disaster. Maybe we see him kind of pulling Alonso and flirt around with a bunch of different series in a part-time capacity. I could see that. That's the only way that I could see this playing out as a scouting situation, is if Jimmy is absolutely terrible next year, has another winless season, and it's just worse without Chad. I could see a situation where maybe he takes a back seat and kind of goes off and does a bunch of different things. And to that end, Zach Brown does have a United Autosport team that runs all over the place, so I'm sure he was watching this a little closer than most people.
Yeah, I think
it's interesting because the last guy to do this sort of, a NASCAR guy to get into a single-seater car, of course, was Brad Keselowski. Was it about 18 months ago?
Yeah, he tested Simon Pagenaud's Penske at Road America.
Yeah, that was it. Apparently he wasn't too hot from what the reports say. He was struggling. So it's interesting that Jimmy was obviously a lot closer to the benchmarks than Brad was.
I think the Formula One car is a little easier to drive than the current Indy car, though.
Potentially, yeah.
Yeah,
it has power steering, so.
Yeah, the numbers that came out of it were, yeah.
Yeah, but Keselowski had fun though. He said he really enjoyed it, want to try it again. So it's but at the end of the day, I think Jimmy at heart is a racer, and he wants to race, and I think he sees that maybe his full-time Cup days are coming to a close. He's accomplished everything he can accomplish in Cup. You know what I mean? He's had a Hall of Fame career. And some of his own comments when he was asked a question about doing open wheel races, he says he said he's seen guys come over from open wheel into NASCAR. He said they've been competitive. Maybe they haven't won a lot of races, but they've been competitive. And, you can, imagine who he's talking about, Danica, Dario, Robbie Gordon, Tony Stewart came out of open wheel, all with varying degrees of success. And then he said, but very few guys from NASCAR have ever gone the other way. Not in years, not since the days when, like the Allisons would go run the Indy 500. You really haven't seen that the other way. So now, Gray, you've been quiet, so I want to bring you into the conversation here. So, what do you feel like long-term for Jimmy? Do you think this I might want to try IndyCar races is just some idle talk, because the getting the project together for even on a part-time thing is there's very limited available seats in IndyCar. Obviously, someone's going to have to fund it. But do you think it's just idle talk from Jimmy, or do you think it's something that he really may have an interest in his post-Cup career?
Well, I think they all have an interest in it. If you'll recall, at the end of the IndyCar season, the new champion expressed a desire of maybe running some Xfinity or some Cup races too. So, like Joey said, these guys are racers. And they're students of the sport. They watch other disciplines. They're not just totally focused on what they do. Sure, they've earned their living in their chosen discipline. But these guys watch racing all over the world. They they respect and admire what guys in other forms of motorsports do, and you can't help but feel that these guys would like to take a crack at it, at some of the other stuff. They cross over a little bit. I saw today where Wayne Taylor announced his lineup for the 24 hours at Daytona, the Rolex 24, and I believe Alonso is going to be in one of his cars there. So these guys look at other things. Of course, Jimmy's run the Rolex 24. Scott Dixon, he's won it multiple times, and I think these guys do. They're so focused now on the discipline that they choose to do. It doesn't leave a lot of room for them to expand like it did years and years ago. But I think when they look at their current career in their chosen discipline winding down, I think they look at other avenues to want to explore.
And just on that note, we've been talking about it as, from the standpoint of a driver. Looking at it from the standpoint of a race fan, in recent months, there's actually been a little bit of talk, a little bit of rumor of a possible doubleheader of the Cup Series and the IndyCar Series at Chicagoland Speedway. Well, earlier today it was announced that the K&N combination race at Gateway Motorsports Park will be a doubleheader with IndyCar on the same exact day. The K&N Pro Series will run during the day, IndyCar at night.
The trucks in IndyCar have run at
Texas
and Vegas.
Actually, it was a truck race and an IndyCar race at Kansas where I met my wife.
Yeah. Okay. So
all those years ago,
the precedent is there to do it. But I think you gotta, in this day and time, the way to get the bigger bang for both series is to run, pair both Premier Series together.
Yep.
Which, like I said, there is talk in the industry about doing that. It's just a matter of getting everybody on the same page.
Well, I think they're going to be forced to the table, really, to do what's best for the overall health of the sport. Because when you see the numbers, the year-end numbers come out for TV ratings, everybody was down. IndyCar was down in ratings. Average viewership was down. So likewise in NASCAR, the ratings and average viewership. Average viewership in NASCAR racing was down from 4.1 to 3.3 million, and that's average viewers. That's a hell of a drop.
Although the digital viewing, streaming, stuff like that was up 49% for NASCAR. I think it was up similar in IndyCar, like about 45% or something like that, which that doesn't account for everybody that the TV ratings have lost or anything like that, but it's still a significant increase.
Yeah, and it just goes to show you there's other media coming into play now, but still the big chair at the table is still for TV for both series, and that's the one they've got to that's the market they've got to target, and they've got to improve on. That's going to help the overall health of the sport, really.
Certainly, and then the other big thing after TV they need to tackle is the number of butts in seats at the races. I mean,
absolutely,
and that's week in, week out, and not just NASCAR but IndyCar. Playing to empty grandstands in Phoenix and a couple other places that could do better. But to your point, Seth, this St. Louis, Gateway, which has done a great job of filling the stands. I mean, what a better place to first try this experiment with the two, the NASCAR race and the IndyCar race in the same day. Funny earlier this week there were some friends of mine that were right, but earlier this week there were some friends of mine on social media that were bitching that the price of the because they were ordering their tickets for next year for St. Louis, and they said, last year this ticket was $55, this year it's $100, and they didn't know why. But at the time they hadn't announced that it was going to be a double header yet. So maybe before you piss those folks off, maybe we should have announced the full headliner before we put the tickets on sale. But then again, I'm no marketing rep, but we've got that kind of bad taste in the mouth of the ticket holders already who may not renew just based on, wow, why is this so much more this year? Instead of getting that average, hey, you're going to get 2 races for the price of 1. Mind you, it's a K&N race. You may not recognize a soul there, but you'll probably see a pretty good show. But at the other time, the most compelling thing about this whole thing is I see that it's NASCAR reaching out to IndyCar, and not the other way around. It's the new fellow who's charged. I can't think of the guy's name. Is the one mentioning maybe getting with IndyCar and doing a doubleheader. So, but either way, it's a win. It's a win-win. No, what's his name?
The new president of NASCAR.
Okay.
Name just escapes me. Now I look stupid on the air.
Yeah, but
so.
it's like I said, both series are going to have to explore ways if they have to, and they're going to be more or less forced to join together, really, for the overall health of motorsports. Period. If they're going to survive going forward, because I tell you, NASCAR is looking at some really challenging times ahead when this new TV contract is negotiated in a couple of years. A lot of money is going to go away, and that's going to have a huge impact in the sport, and it's going to change the way the sport does business overnight.
Steve Phelps.
Steve Phelps, yes. And on that note about changing the way they do business, there's been some talk about NASCAR with the entitlement sponsorship. With Monster's going to perhaps come to an end. Maybe not, but they're talking about a new business model. And what I can see, what I can glean from this, what I'm hearing is that we're not going to have one presenting sponsor for the series. It'll be it's going to mirror what the teams are doing, where we see a different livery on the cars each week. And there's going to be more official, the official fuel, the official this, the official beer, the official hot dog, and I believe that we may even, with the title naming races to each race, see a bigger cut of that go back to NASCAR rather than having one, title sponsor for the whole series. Is going to be a group of different sponsors as they'll rotate through portions of the season, and that'll.
What it boils down to is it's an economic reality that
exactly,
and you see the same thing with the sponsorship that the teams are doing. It wasn't too many years ago that you had a full sponsor for an entire season. Now you have multiple sponsors. You sell each individual race basically, and you hope to sell all 36 races. To allow you to run the season, fully funded, and NASCAR's having to do the same thing because the sponsors there aren't there lining up to fund a full 36 race season. They seeing the same thing that the car owners are seeing, and they're kind of having to look at some unique ways of pulling it off.
Well, and another just hint of this, or essentially another way of doing this, there's been talk where it would be the regular season is one sponsor and the playoffs is another sponsor. There's also talk of something similar to the ARCA model right now, in which they have a short track challenge that's sponsored by Sioux Chief, a speedway challenge named after Bill France Jr. that has a sponsor. You have the overall championship, which is sponsored by Menards. And then you have various other sponsors throughout the year for polls and stuff like that.
And that's a unique way of doing it because you break it down and essentially, you can you put the focus on different types of races. And NASCAR, like I said, that'd be a great idea for NASCAR, Seth, in that they could do a speedway champion, a short track champion. Hell, they could even do a road course championship. You know what I'm saying? Or a road, or a kind of race within a race kind of thing that you're looking at. Yeah, and that could be a way of helping to get some influx of some much needed capital, into the sport.
Yeah, it's so much easier to ask several companies for $5 million apiece than to ask one company to shell out $30 million for the season, or
Yeah.
more. I mean, gone are the days when you can get a cigarette company, say, hey, Winston, take on the whole thing. Those days are gone.
Yeah.
Internet marketing is so much cheaper for corporations than sports sponsorship. So they just need to continue to find ways to make the sport attractive to sponsors and reach out to as many sponsors as they can for smaller commitments. And so
I think the telling
let's
thing.
move on.
One last thing. I think the telling thing is, for we talked about cigarette sponsorship, and that was big. We all know what happened to the cigarette industry. But for many years, and I'm talking about in all motorsports, Anheuser-Busch was the bell cow for all of. They sponsored cars and series and all kinds of stuff throughout every form of motorsports. And they've essentially gone away. They've gone away. And they've put their money in other sports marketing. So I think that's, to me, that's a huge loss for the industry. Because what does everybody do when they go to race? They sit around and drink beer.
Drink beer, yeah. Well, I mean, part of the problem is Anheuser-Busch is no longer owned by Anheuser-Busch.
Right, true, but still,
they've been purchased by InBev, and InBev is the
right.
biggest conglomerate. They own 80% of the beer market in the world, and
But still, they've got a captive audience.
Oh yeah, absolutely, yeah. They have so many brands they could put on a race car, but they have what, Busch Light and Busch NA on Kevin Harvick's six race deal, right?
But they've put their eggs in other baskets now, because you go to every Major League Baseball park, every NFL stadium, every minor league baseball park, and the place is plastered with Budweiser and the like. So they've turned their focus away from motorsports. And I think, that's, to me, therein lies the problem. We've got to return these sponsors like that back to the sport.
Absolutely, yeah. So let's pick up on another topic. So we've finished up Formula One. As long as we're talking about NASCAR a little bit. So let's talk about state of the sport. So, Gray, I'll start with you. Joey Logano finished up as champion. It lends that underdog element to the chase. We spoke about it last week. We've got the
big three and me.
The big three and me, the stick of ball thing. So Joey has done his championship tour. So digging in for next year, there's a number of different driver changes for next year. So, and something's going on with your team there. So maybe you can quickly fill us in about what 2019 is going to look for at Richard Childress.
Well, Richard Childress has decided they're going to kind of reduce their involvement in the Xfinity series. So that essentially reduces their overall in NASCAR involvement. Right now, they're gonna retract and go back to just 4 teams, 2 Cup teams, 2 Xfinity teams, and they're gonna move all that operation under one roof. So that's what's going on with RCR right now. Of course, they previously named Daniel Hemrick to replace Ryan Newman in the 31 Caterpillar car, and Caterpillar, I believe, is going to be back in that operation for 12 races next year. And of course, they'll announce the rest of that sponsor lineup going forward. Of course, Austin Dillon will be back into 3, and I think the primary sponsor on that for most of the year will be Dow. Tyler Reddick is coming over from Junior Motorsports to occupy one of the Xfinity cars, and we know for sure of that one right now. There's nothing been confirmed for the second Xfinity car out of the RCR stable right now, so that's still up in the air, and I imagine some stuff will be forthcoming on that as we hit the banquet circuit and stuff coming up in the next 10 days or so. One interesting thing I saw today is Kurt Busch had hoped to make his announcement on where he's going to go and what he's going to do. And I saw some reports that there were some holdups because some of the partners he hasn't gotten them in place or hasn't got commitments from them yet. Seth may be able to add something to that, but and then of course the other driver changes that we already know about, we've talked about previously that are coming up. But Joey Logano ends up our champion. I think it's pretty good to crown a first-time champion in the sport. I think that's exciting and good for the sport. To have someone come, we talked about Harvick and Busch and Truex pretty much dominating the year for most of the year, and of course Keselowski and Joey got hot toward the back third or back quarter of the season, and were able to bring about 5 wins to Penske and a strong finish for that organization, and to claim a second championship for Team Penske. It was a good season for several things. Chase Elliott comes up and he gets his first win and caps that off with 2 more to get 3 wins, and they were the only 3 wins for a somewhat down year for Hendrick Motorsports. But still, good year for Chase, and something to build on for next year. Then the big news out of Hendrick was the breakup of Chad Knaus and Jimmy Johnson parting ways, and also add to that the loss of Lowe's to that equation. So there's going to be some different faces, some crew chief changes over at Hendrick Motorsports, and working with different drivers. So we'll see how they tackle the 2019 with another. They had they'll have some more time with the Chevy Camaro that proved to be somewhat difficult for the Chevy teams to get a handle of this year. So we'll see if some improvements can be made there. Major news for the Ford teams that had a great year. They won 19 races in the Manufacturers Championship. They are changing from the Fusion, which the model they've had for a number of years now. They're going to the Mustang. So we'll have to see how that transformation goes forward, and see if they can hit the ground running and continue the success they had in 2018. Other guys somewhat disappointing. Kyle Larson, we had thought at the beginning of the year that Kyle Larson would have a big year. Went winless, and also Denny Hamlin. That was surprising to me that he went winless for Joe Gibbs. And 2 of Joe Gibbs' cars got wins. Of course, Kyle Busch and Kevin Harvick led the way with 8 wins each, and then of course Eric Jones was able to get a win at Daytona in July for Gibbs. So and then we had Ryan Blaney. He picked up a little bit where he left off. He did get a win at a surprising win, I think, at the Roval. So some of the things we went kind of true to form that we thought, but there was a few of those surprises I just mentioned. What stood out for you guys as some of the highs and lows of the 2018 Cup season?
Well, one thing I just want to throw out there while we're talking about changes for next year, before we, Martin Truex moving over to the Gibbs team. It's the shuttering of the 78 team is sad in all of itself. But you talk about over the last couple of years, right? Martin Truex and Kyle Busch have combined to win quite a few races, But you don't often see 2 teammates on the same team winning those incredible number of races. You'll see one guy way ahead of the other. Like you see, Kyle Busch winning, 6 or 7, and Denny Hamlin picking up 2 or 3 along the way, or whatnot, But having these 2 guys on the same team who are been prolific race winners the last couple of seasons. Are they going to be stealing wins from one another? Can they keep up this pace, particularly with the Penskes and the Harvick and Stewart Haas in the mix there? I just don't know how this relationship with Kyle and Martin on the same team is going to work.
I think one of the X factor and all that is going to be Cole Pearn. I think, to me, Cole Pearn was probably as much sought after as Martin Truex. I mean, Richard can talk about that in the whole equation. So we'll see how that works. They're going to have the similar resources, so we'll see how that goes.
Yeah, so I guess it could go one way or the other. They could win nearly half the races of the season, or they can be, duking it out, the two of them at the front week in and week out, so it'd be interesting to see, with Martin, because Martin has done so well with a team with fewer resources, but to see him with all the resources of Joe Gibbs and Toyota behind his back, I just with Cole, I can imagine that maybe Kyle Busch is a little nervous.
Yeah, it is going to be interesting, isn't it? It's going to be the sort of, very much so the big fish in a small pond through to a small fish in a big pond. How will that dynamic work? And as Gray mentioned, you're also getting the engineering support from, Cole Pearn. It wouldn't surprise me if there's not a couple of other Furniture Row guys heading that way as well, as part of the package, because they do tend to sort of hunt in packs, these guys. So,
they kind of all out of work. So
yeah, and in all fairness, if there's any of those guys wanting to move, because I know a lot of the guys there did leave North Carolina to go over there in the last few years. If there's any guys wanting to move back here, they've got a pretty good resume to stick under the nose of some prospective employees. So it will be interesting. You've got this. And I hope it doesn't, but you do wonder if it's all going to end in tears. Are those two guys too bigger personalities to work together in that situation and to work together? Who knows? I've got this doubt that it'll work in the long run. I think it'll all turn a bit sour pretty quick.
Little Prost and Senna.
Not
quite that bad, huh?
No, not quite as entertaining as that, but. I just think it's going to be I can see that the first team meeting that Joe Gibbs has with the teams next year. Kyle's going to make sure he's the first driver there and he gets the head seat next to the coach and all that sort of stuff. I can see there being a few mind games going on there between the drivers.
It'll be fun to watch. That's for sure. Yeah, that's one of the things on my radar next year, just to watch how that relationship plays out. So, but otherwise, Seth, what were some of your most compelling moments of 2018 on the NASCAR, and you can trucks or Xfinity or Cup, whatever.
Well, I have to start out with the end of the Xfinity race at Daytona. Not because of all the crashes, but just because of how close of a finish that was between Tyler Reddick and Elliott Sadler, closest finish in NASCAR history. I mean, I'm not sure it gets more compelling than something like that, depending on the situation anyway. Another compelling one was the whole debacle of Justin Haley going below the yellow line, also at Daytona. This was the July race for the Xfinity Series. The Truck Series race at Eldora, Chase Briscoe hopping down to the Truck Series to have some fun with Ford Performance and Thor Sport Racing, ended up taking a win from his teammate essentially as a beat and bang. And Briscoe, by the way, will be running full-time in the Xfinity Series next year with Stewart Haas Racing as a teammate to Cole Custer. But that race, it was just one of the most exciting ones all year. The ongoing story of Hattori being an underfunded team and struggling with, at times, the OEM engine, and then their late switch to the NT1 engine. It was interesting to see, especially the other truck teams try to come up with, I don't want to say excuses, but rebuttals towards the story that Hattori had. And it's kind of disappointing to see that even with all their success, Brett Moffitt couldn't find a sponsor to stay with Hattori. They somewhat made it clear at Homestead that he's not going to be back next year, which is disappointing in the end. That being said, some of the lows this year, Joey Logano, funny enough, at Watkins Glen, his team not understanding the whole damaged vehicle policy after running into the back of someone and damaging their car, going to the garage instead of going to their pit stall, knocked them out of the race. Somewhat embarrassing in hindsight, but understandable in the moment. They were just trying to think, oh, we had a mechanical issue.
Yeah, it's one of these rules that maybe NASCAR and the team should know. Geez, the team should know exactly what's going on. But I think they need to sort of get that across to the fans a little bit better, how all that works and the reason behind it. I just actually wanted to talk to you guys very, very briefly about looking forward to something next year. And we've already mentioned the trials and struggles of some of these bigger teams. Next year with Furniture Row shutting down and the like. But also, some of the smaller teams are actually expanding. Starcom is going to be trying to run 2 full-time cars next year. There's talk of Rick Ware Racing going to 2 full-time cars next year. I believe Front Rowers added a 3rd car. A Baker Racing are going to be doing more races next year. So from a smaller team standpoint, I think it's quite good. And I think we've almost reached like a point of critical mass here where actually now is the time for these smaller teams to get into NASCAR. It's a new wave. It's a new way of running the sport coming. And these are the teams that are saying, hey, look, if we get in here now and we get all of our ducks in a row and run our teams properly and professionally and efficiently, we're going to be around for a long time here while some of the bigger teams flounder and struggle around us.
And just to add to that, you have Tommy Baldwin Racing returning for a part-time schedule. Carl Long said he's going to enter 2 cars in a number of races next year instead of just 1 car. So you have some different stories here and there. Carl Long, they essentially get to spend more money on the Cup Series now, his team, because they're no longer trying to keep their old 2012 Dodges up and running in the Xfinity Series. Not really a knock towards them. Have to give them credit where credit's due, though, with trying to go and keep the car running and save as much money as they could instead of going out and getting an alliance with, say, Childress or Hendrick, or with how costly that can be. So
yeah, I think a lot of these smaller teams now aren't doing alliances, are they? They're just buying parts.
Yeah, and I think
for the most part.
Yeah,
I think Tommy's going to run about 15 races, and I talked with Tommy about a month ago when I was asking him what his plans were for 2019. At that time, he didn't know because he still had work with Premium Motorsports, but his job over at Premium, part of that was he was out acquiring sponsorship for Premium, and that kind of funded his position and his job there. At the time, he didn't know how that was gonna go forward in 2019, but he told me, hey, I've done it before. I've got the equipment sitting here, and I'll jump in and crank things up and start my team back again. So Tommy made that announcement this week that he plans to do that. So that's and you're gonna see some other. You got Starcom there. That's a small team that's trying to go. And I think you probably alluded to Tiff going to a 3rd car over at Front Row. So some movement, some retraction. I think we'll just have to see how things go.
We're not even in December yet, and by my count, as of right now, we could have as many as 43 cars attempting the Daytona 500.
Yeah. So we'll see, and we only had 39 attempt the season finale at Homestead. So, that's another thing, too. We talk about car counts in every series that we talk about. A good sign of a good, healthy series is a good, healthy car count, no doubt about it. So we'll just have to wait and see, who gets funding to go to Daytona.
And speaking of car counts in the Xfinity Series, as you said earlier, we're more than likely losing one from Richard Childress Racing.
Two maybe.
Possibly, possibly
one
two. We're losing two from Roush, more than likely. We might be losing one from Junior Motorsports, and we're gaining one from Stuart Haas. So, of all the series, the Xfinity Series might actually be taking the hardest hit this off season.
Could be, and one more thing to add to what you're saying about the addition at Stuart Haas and the subtraction at Roush. One of those cars that was a Ford sponsored car, and Ford is taking that over to Stuart Haas, and they're going to put Briscoe in that car. He's been sort of a Ford development driver, and they're going to reward him and put him in that second Stuart Haas Mustang.
And Nutrichomps also signed on to the car for 13 races.
Okay. But yeah, the Xfinity Series has got some work to do. That's another series that struggles with TV ratings and attendance, and that's something NASCAR's got to look at long and hard because the health of the Xfinity Series, in my opinion, is not good.
Yeah. So on that note, what are the plans for, NASCAR had purchased ARCA, right, which is similar to the K&N that they have there. And so what are the long-term plans for NASCAR's ARCA purchase? Is there a way to kind of wrap all that up and maybe remove a tier there that could maybe help boost Xfinity?
Well, they already announced it. Next year, it's going to be the same as this year. Starting in 2020, they're actually going to reduce the number of races for K&N in both series, I believe, down to 8 total for each. And there's going to be 4 different championships. 2 for the one for each K&N, 1 for ARCA, and 1 combined championship.
So that'll be a combined ARCA K&N championship?
Yes, and there will be combination races, as well as the one championship is for drivers that are of age to compete in K&N and certain ARCA tracks, but not able to compete on, say, Daytona or Pocono for ARCA.
So will they be a common car then that they can run it?
It will be a common car, and certain tracks you can run either chassis because it's not a overwhelming difference. And the way that was explained to me is a track like, say, Iowa.
Mm-hmm. Well, we'll see.
Yeah, see how all that works out. So, but yeah, I just wonder if there's a way to mash all that and funnel more ARCA teams to maybe stepping up to Xfinity. Because our Xfinity is heavily reliant on teams that are satellites of Cup teams, and there's not so many straight Xfinity teams. And if you had a ARCA or K&N guys that also had a Xfinity team, it may help boost that series. It almost seems like to me the outside viewer there that the truck series is there in the ladder, but it almost doesn't belong. You know what I mean? It's like a splinter.
Well, ARCA is often paired up with the truck series right now. They both race the same weekend at Gateway. I believe they both race the same weekend at... I'm trying to think of the track. I want to say Iowa, but I don't think it's Iowa.
I think Michigan. They still do that.
And
same
Pocono.
Weekend. Yeah.
So it is more often not paired up with the truck series. That being said, it's almost, at least until it's changed in a couple of years, ARCA has kind of been something that blends K&N Pro, truck, and excavating together. And the reason why I'm saying that is ARCA's rules are so unique. Take Harrison Burton, for example. He was not of age to run most of the truck races this year because he didn't turn 18 until October 1st. Meanwhile, in ARCA, he was of age to go and run Pocono, and he won at Pocono. The only tracks he was not of age to compete at in the ARCA series was Daytona, Talladega, and Michigan.
We'll just have to see how it all plays out. But to Gray's original point, that Xfinity series needs some help to get some eyeballs back on it. So, but let's turn to another topic here. So now, Joey, you've gone to most of the IndyCar races this year. We saw the debut of the Universal Aero Kit. We did see a season with no new winners, but a very competitive season. We nearly had new winner in Robert Wickens, but his season was cut a little short. So let's talk about some of the most compelling moments of the IndyCar season and why we have reason just to be kind of optimistic about the future.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, where to start, right? Where to start, yeah.
I guess the first thing that pops into my mind is, it's funny because we were on Motorsports Tribune. We were working on driver reviews for the season, and I actually was doing Will Power's driver review. So it allowed me a chance to kind of reflect back. And I was just thinking about the fact of how much his legend grew this past year. Winning the Indy 500, one of the few drivers who have won a championship and won the Indy 500 both. I think that it's interesting to see what's going to happen with him next year and how everything kind of goes, because something I did notice is over the course of this past year, he only had 11 top 10 finishes. There's 17 races in the year, and he gets 11 of them, and he finishes third in the championship. But his championship season, he had 15 top 10s and over 600 laps led. So he's fully capable. I think my biggest takeaway for him in particular is the fact that he's with a Team Penske group that struggled as a whole for the most part of 2018, and I think that not having Elio there was interesting with the team dynamic, but returning the same guys, Joseph Newgarden, Simon Pagenaud, and Power next year, you would like to think that they're going to get a hold of this Universal Aero Kit, right? So that's certainly something that's going to be interesting to look at moving forward, but his legend growing, Power's legend growing was incredible to watch. The emotion that he just, the emotion just pouring out of him in victory lane, it was incredible. And I think it's great that something like that race pours so much emotion out of everybody, all the teams, all the drivers. Being a media guy, you see it day in and day out the whole month of May. And so that was incredibly cool.
Still the biggest race in the world.
Absolutely, and
yeah, for sure, yeah.
To that end, as much as we saw that joy, it was also just as demoralizing to see James Hinchcliffe miss the show on Bump Day just a week prior. And I think that you see the wave of emotions, and you see everything that Schmidt-Peterson has gone through this year. Just the entire team. I mean, you miss the Indy 500, you turn right around and you fight back, and you get a guy that's really a badass hot shoe rookie in Robert Wickens, who looks like he's on the cusp of becoming big time, just ultra competitive, ultra good, on the level of an Alexander Rossi, a Scott Dixon, a Will Power kind of talent. And obviously we see the shunt at Pocono that happened. But he continues to show this beautiful personality that he has, that the fighting spirit, while just being a casual jokester as he always is, just keeping it all in perspective. And he continues to show growth. And hopefully, if he chooses to race again, and I hope that we get to see him come full circle on just exactly what kind of potential he was starting to show us, because we just saw a glimpse of what he was really going to be able to do.
Yeah, for sure. And before we get too far away from talking about Will Power, I just want to circle back to that for a moment. Then I want to circle back to Wickens. But this off season, Will Power has had the chance to go back to Australia, and I don't know if you've seen some of the videos that he's returned to us, and that his brother Damien has returned to us, where he's been on every talk show in Australia, sharing his experience of winning the Indy 500. But this has raised interest in a resurgence of the Gold Coast Grand Prix that started as a kart race in '91 and ran for a number of years. But now there's serious talks about getting Indy cars back in Australia, largely due to Will Power's victory tour back home. So I think that's incredibly exciting. It's a neat little race course. They've had some pretty cool races. I remember the inaugural one there was plagued by a little bit of rain, but we saw John Andretti besting Rick Mears, I believe, for John Andretti's one and only IndyCar win.
Yeah, I mean, I think that first off, I don't know how we've gotten so far away from like a surfer's paradise situation over the years, because when you look at the kind of talent we have from New Zealand with Scott Dixon and Australia with Will Power, I'm thankful that we're running into a situation finally where that's starting to become a conversation again, and hopefully we get something put together here shortly to where we see IndyCar go back to Australia, because I mean, let's be honest, Will Power and Scott Dixon aren't getting any younger. They're still just as talented, if not more, than anybody else on the grid. And so I think that for those fans that are there who have been lifelong fans of both Dixon and Power, it would be a treat if, as a series, as a sanctioning body, that we could kind of give that back and put together something with I don't know necessarily the details of if it's county or what have you, or how that whole thing's being driven on the government side of things. But if that can be put together, I think it would be a treat for the fans. That said, these were the kind of mumblings that we also heard. Some of us heard anyway, after Takuma won the Indy 500 last year. So, Japan, he's become the superhero. I mean, I would be hard-pressed to say that he's probably not the most popular driver, most popular athlete that's in Japan right now, based on some of the people I've talked to who are from that country and just the kind of elite level of superstar status he reached. And those rumblings started to take place a little bit, and they didn't necessarily come to fruition, so maybe these will, and I certainly hope that that's the case.
Well, too, and you talking about Australia, you also, and we covered this a little bit on last week's show when we were talking about Team Penske's 33 championships across all forms of motorsports. They picked up a 34th last weekend in the Australian Supercar Series. So, yeah, and when you have an American brand like Team Penske winning over in the Australian supercars, that also, I would imagine, piques interest in having an American series come over and run in Australia.
Yeah, absolutely. I personally would love to see IndyCar. This won't ever happen, where maybe they share a Saturday, Sunday show with F1. So if that's not going to happen, I would love to see a situation where Australian supercars could be in the mix to kind of create a doubleheader treat for the fans.
Yeah, I thought the Australian Supercar show that they had over at COTA several years ago was wild. I thought that was a hell of a race when they brought those guys in. So yeah, I think, I'm surprised. We've had a few guys from that series come over and make a few forays into American racing. I wonder if we'll see any more of guys come over and either try their hand at IndyCar or stock car in the coming years.
So what was your Wickens reference there, Frank? What did you want to get to on Wickens before we started going more on my year of IndyCar?
No, I just wanted to get you back to where you left off, on Wickens, that he was, I'm no medical professional, but I know his road to recovery is going to be a long one, and it's going to be a hard one. But, to your point, to see him be so optimistic and upbeat about it is absolutely heartwarming, because there's a possibility that he may never walk on his own again, right? But at the same time, he says he's got to spark those nerves. So I think the human spirit is an amazing thing, and if you look at guys like Billy Monger, who we talked about earlier today, and Alex Zanardi, and even Sam Schmidt, the human spirit is stronger than anything. So we just wish Robert well.
Yeah,
And
I mean,
we're going to see, we're going to see Marcus Ericsson in his car next year. And I'm really interested to see how that's going to play out, because I think Ericsson could be a very entertaining guy to watch.
for the first time in his life, he could be one of the most entertaining guys to watch. Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, look, it's tough to watch F1 races sometimes, because no matter how talented you are, you're stuck in a crap car and you're not going to finish any better than 10th, right?
Right.
No,
right.
I'm interested to see what he can do whenever the playing field's a little bit more level. And I think he'll do fine.
We saw what Rossi did.
I'll tell you right now, you put Rossi in any one of those top three rides, top six rides, I should say, top three teams, he'll win a damn championship in F1. I mean, there's certain guys that just, their talent is head and shoulders above, and kind of feeding into that next subject of looking at the IndyCar season, since we're kind of mentioning Rossi here. We knew when he won the Indy 500 a few years back that was just something that was super cool, but we were all kind of on pins and needles wondering, is he going to take the ball and run back to Europe, or is he going to hang out here and make something of it? And he hung out here and he's made something of it. And we saw him reach, in my opinion, superstar status this past season, because he drove with a bulldog mentality, with a new aero kit that everybody had to learn, and at places that were supposed to be so difficult to pass and couldn't be done, he found a way to do it. I mean, he's passing on the outside at Indy. He put together 20-something% of all the passes that happened at the Phoenix race. When he started on pole at Long Beach, he lit it up and left everybody. He did the same thing with fuel mileage at Mid-Ohio, which was brilliant. And we saw just his entire makeup of what he was. He looked poised and ready to win the championship. And like many that were before him, Scott Dixon got in the way. And I think that we're only seeing just the very minuscule amount of what Rossi's going to be delivering for a lot of people for a lot of years, because he's still, I mean, he's not even 30 yet. I think he's like 27, 28. I think Newgarden might even be older. We're going to see a lot of Rossi for the next 10 or 15 years, and I would be shocked if he's not going to be a multi-time champion at that point, maybe even a multi-time Indy 500 winner. With him and Jeremy Millis, his engineer, at the helm with this Universal Aero kit, they're going to be tough to beat for a long time. So it was great to see his kind of resolve and his kind of makeup and the aggressive attitude that he has. He makes races fun, right? Like, you look at Detroit. That race was, street course at Detroit. It's not exactly the easiest place to pass, and it's tough to put a complete lap together. And he was over here just dogging it, and just, you could tell when he's getting the most out of a car. And there are certain situations, there's just an added element of excitement no matter what race it is. St. Pete season opener last year, going for the win, ends up knocking Wickens out in his debut, and that created a buzz. And to me, it's fun because he's not afraid to play the villain. If you want to look at him as a villain, he's not afraid to play the hero if you want him to be the hero. At the end of the day, he's just who he is, and he's out there to get the wins. And you can take it as he's being a villain or that he's being a hero, but those are the kind of things, that's the kind of spirit that IndyCar's needed for a long time. Will Power is exciting as anybody, but whenever you interview him, sometimes it doesn't come off that way, right? So it's good to see.
I would argue Rossi's pretty dry in an interview as well. So
his actions are pretty lacking of excitement. They got all the excitement you could want in a race. I mean, I don't see.
Oh yeah. You said when you interview him.
Yeah. Well,
he's pretty dry in an interview. No, he's pretty spectacular on the track. Power's also spectacular on the track. He's just a little more controlled. So, but that's what 5 more years in the series will do for you.
Yeah, well, and Penske. Let's not forget how PR people get whenever they get around Penske. But I think the other end of that is kind of moving forward. Scott Dixon. I mean, 5 championships this, 5-time champion, got the title this year. I mean, when he won Texas, midsummer, I mean, it was almost a foregone conclusion that this guy was going to win the title, because usually it's around the summer that he heats up and goes on a tear to close in on the championship. The fact that he was, pretty much had everything right in front of him after Texas. I mean, I'm wondering if he's going to shatter the. I mean, we're all sitting here wondering if he's going to shatter the records that have been set in place by AJ Foyt. Only thing separating him is time and if the car's there. And I think that's always kind of the concern. He'll get a good challenge next year with Felix Rosenqvist at the helm. Felix is incredible talent. I mean, that's stuff we could talk about in a preview for next year. But as far as like just what he's meant to the sport of IndyCar racing in general is incredible. And the Universal Aero Kit brought great racing at road and street courses. They're still tweaking the oval package, as we all know. So we'll see if that can get to where it's a little bit more in favor of everybody. But I think, let's be honest, the manufacturer Aero Kit era spoiled us with what kind of racing we saw at the Indy 500. It wasn't always that spectacular. But if you were a new fan and you started to see that stuff and you didn't know anything back in 2001 and 96 and 89 and all those things, if you didn't know that kind of racing, then you weren't necessarily sure what to make maybe this year at the 500. But I mean, as a whole, the racing we've seen from top to bottom was top notch, because at the end of the day, it's pure racing. It's not DRS or anything like that. I love what we've had this year, and I'm excited to see guys like Zach Veach. Can they take another step up? Marco Andretti looked like he started to find a little bit of his old rhythm. He still doesn't have that podium, which is crazy to think, because, I mean, he was, up until this year, the last guy, or maybe it was last year, the last guy to finish top 5 in the championship for Andretti Autosport. And that was, 2013. So I'm interested to see where that goes. Can Hunter Ray keep his form? Hunter Ray finally broke that winless drought, got himself 2 victories, including that one at Sonoma. And, I mean, it's just, there's a lot of questions we have moving forward, but this year was so awesome with some of the things that we saw. I mean, the return to Portland was great. The announcement of going back to Laguna Seca next year, the wild race that was Portland, matter of fact. I mean, I think we all remember that pile up in turn 1, and somehow, some way, where Rossi looks like he's walking off with it and closing in on the championship, the dust settles and Dixon rides out of a 5-car pileup to collect good, precious points. And somehow, through all this chaos, Takuma Sato wins for Rahal Letterman Lanigan Racing that had been struggling all year. So there's so many awesome storylines, so many awesome little things to look forward to for next year. And, where some guys this year struggled, can they rebound next year? Guys like Graham Rahal, things like that. So, it's amazing to me to see that on IndyCar level. I'm curious to see what also, the season finale in Sonoma. Now you got me all hyper worked up talking about all this stuff. But Sonoma, Sonoma.
You will be on sleep tonight now.
Oh yeah, Frank wanted to make it a 2-hour show, so. I look at Sonoma. We had Harding Racing, which is now Harding Steinbrenner Racing, but at the time we saw Colton Herta, runner-up in the Indy Lights Championship, make his debut, second-generation driver, and then we saw his rival in Indy Lights, teammate in Indy Lights, Patricio Ward, step up and have just an electrifying debut at Sonoma. So I'm interested to see where we are moving forward, because we have so many great young drivers, and we've got a plethora of really solid veterans who have set the standard. And I think that they're all going to come to a head next year, and it should be a lot of fun to watch.
I have a question.
Yeah, so let's talk about next year. Yeah, go ahead, Gray.
No, and you may have touched on a little bit, or you may not have, but the only really disappointing thing that I saw last year in IndyCar racing, to me personally, was the quality of the speedway racing. With the new Aero Kit, it kind of declined a little bit from what it had been the past couple of years. Joey, I'm sure people noticed that, but what does the IndyCar as a group say about that? Are they going to try to make some improvements to kind of bring back a little bit of that better racing that we saw previously on the speedways?
Yeah, so at Indy they ran kind of a baseline setup with the Universal Aero Kit, and then when we got to the next speedway, which was Pocono, they tried a spoiler adjuster. Is the best way I can. I don't know the actual term of it off the top of my head, but it was kind of an adjuster that you had for the front wing that had some little wicks and flicks and all those things that are fun that the manufacturer Aero Kit kind of had, but they put a little subtle adjustment for the front front wing, and they tried that out at Pocono, and then there was more testing after the season. And from what I heard, everything after the season in that test was pretty positive moving forward. It's not, to my knowledge, they haven't come to a 100% decision on exactly what package is going to be run, but they said it was a step in the right direction. I'm sure if somebody talked to Jay Fry about it, he said that it checked all the boxes because that's his famous saying. Mm-hmm. But I don't know if we're going to continue with the adjuster that we saw at Pocono. I would like to think that there's something in between that's going to be had there, because I think that, one, I look at speedway racing and it's scary as hell, because at the end of the day, you're looking at a drag, a drafting rate, and if you have this situation where you have just this high drag, low downforce, you're looking at a situation where a guy's going to just creep up on somebody and you have a split second to make a move and they have a split second to cut you off. Mm-hmm. And trying to cut somebody off in turn one at Indianapolis is awfully dangerous. We saw what happened at Pocono in the tunnel turn and in turn two, and that's that was a product of close racing and one guy who wasn't quite experienced, another guy who was super experienced, who both probably shouldn't have been racing that way that early. I mean, that was the first green flag lap of the race, if I remember right, or the second green flag lap of the race. And so there's got to be something there.
Yeah. I thought the 2015, 2016, 2017 Indy 500s were some of the best they've ever been. With the racing, the number of lead changes, how the field really didn't get strung out. You had guys that could race their way up from fourth or fifth to the lead and then fall back. And I just thought it was tremendous. Just great shows.
That's what happens when you have those Kardashians, right? I mean, the butt pods that were on there that made the back end look all boxy, and you created this huge hole in the air like a UPS truck for these guys to suck up on. I actually personally am more in favor of what we have. Not to sound like a homer or anything like that, since I got introduced with IndyCar.com, but I think that there's something to be said with, it's important to make sure that passing is difficult, because this is supposed to be a situation where the cars can be as even as possible as you can physically make them. And it's about the drivers getting the most out of it, the tires, the line, the car, the communication with the team, and finding every little inch to pull. And it was tough to pass. You know what? If it's so tough to pass, maybe you should qualify better.
Hey.
I'm just saying.
Oh, yeah.
At the end of the day, I think that this is a situation where you're making drivers work for it. And as I was said earlier, fans, if you knew nothing before the manufacturer Aero Kit era, then you were absolutely spoiled with what you saw last year, and the year before that, and the year before that. I don't think that open wheel racing should have Kardashians, personally. Otherwise, it looks more like a prototype to me. We're running in that realm where you knock that off and you create debris that can fly, and it could, heaven forbid, land in the stands, or we get, other incidents that we know about that happened on track in years past. So I like this element that we have. I like the fact that it's a little tougher, and you know what? It'll get tweaked. I think everybody should if anybody's upset about what we saw this past year, calm down. It's year one. We got a lot of smart guys.
I'm not ready to throw the baby out with the bathwater. But when you go back and look at what we get gotten used to and what we anticipated when we went to Indy over the last, half a decade or more. These races were ultra competitive. I mean, and
Yeah, all the way back, to the introduction of the DW12 chassis.
yeah,
Because I remember that it was either 12 or 13 where I was watching. I think it was 2013.
And it was some
And every lap was a
races.
different leader. Every lap
Right.
was a different leader. Yeah, it was Kanan and I forget who was fighting with, maybe Dario.
And that in large part had a lot to do with the resurgence of the Indy 500 in my mind. Getting it just built a crescendo, of interest in it. I'm not saying last year was a bad race. I'm just saying that we had gotten kind of used to, here's Indy. We're going to see one whale of a show, and we saw a good show. Don't get me wrong, but it wasn't. I love a lot of lead changes. That's what gets you up on your seat, your edge of your seat, and to me, when you buy into all 200 laps. You know what I'm saying? Because there's something going on the entire time. Because when it gets like a NASCAR race to a degree where you got a guy, he can get out and he can pull a couple of seconds on the field, and he's gonna lead 10, 15, 20 more laps at a stretch, or maybe even a fuel stint. It's still compelling, but it's not like it was when these guys are dicing all the time.
I mean, I think just because I know Frank's probably going to want us to move on here in a minute. I think the biggest thing that I look at with this is, I as much as I love lead changes, I want it to be more authentic in some ways. Not to say that the previous era wasn't, but I hate the fact that the leader's always a sit and duck in those old packages, right? Because you'd get such a pull. Mm-hmm. And to that end, it's kind of like restrictor plate racing. And as we're going to learn next year in NASCAR, with the tapered spacer, and they want to create a show like the All-Star race, we're suddenly going to make Ricky Stenhouse Jr. look like Dale Earnhardt Jr. at all the mile and a halves. So, I think that's – I don't necessarily like that dynamic. I like the element where you see something where it's more in the driver's hands. And I think – when I was a kid, I loved restrictor plate racing, and I loved the kind of product that brought, groups together. Yeah. As I get older, I've learned that I love I love a driver's talent.
Yeah, that's the purest in you. We all have that. All of us have been around a long time. We've seen every form of motorsports and every trick that they've tried to throw at it over the years. And I think now what I'm basically saying is we got to come and reach that medium where we can, where we got to give the fans what they want, and that we don't, you and I, we speak for a certain element of the fans, but we don't speak for all of them. But yeah, I just was curious to what's going on inside IndyCar, and how they felt about the new package and what they were doing, to develop it going forward.
It'll be fun. I know that. I'm interested to see what they do with the front wing. If we're coming back to Indy with an adjuster like we had at Pocono, or any resemblance of that. I personally would like to see a situation where we keep the same product for the most part, but maybe we have a situation where we have more tire degradation. I think the only reason why, not the only reason, that would be wrong to say. I think the biggest reason why we had a variance of passing last year, or this past year, I should say, is because we had the second hottest Indy 500 in history. Mm-hmm. I mean, it was out there. It was 90 plus degrees. Track temps were well over 100. I think that if we had cool temperatures, I think we would have seen a lot less passing. The fact that because the tires have been so durable that Firestone bring, and so I would like to see a little bit more degradation as a whole, to where the drivers could manage it. They could push the first 10 laps if they thought it was a short stint, or if they wanted to play the long game, they could backpedal and maybe turn a typical 10 lap life cycle into a 20 lap life cycle.
The field becomes like an accordion. Yeah, I got you.
Yeah. So that's something I would like to see, to just put it back in the driver's hands. But, we'll see.
We'll see. So speaking of tires, right? So, on the road courses anyway, do you think IndyCar and Firestone need to look at what Pirelli's doing with Formula One, and maybe introduce a third, because you got the reds, the blacks, which are the harder compound soft. Do you think they need to introduce a third variety into the road course racing at all to spice up the road course show, or is this just ridiculous?
To go Kimi on you, I'll just say no.
No, okay. So
No.
So Richard, let me talk to you instead of Joey.
Okay.
I had a good answer. I was just trying to be funny, but all right.
Okay.
No, it's okay. You can go ahead, talk to Richard. I'll rebuttal afterwards.
No, that's fine. No, I really am interested in this. Formula One has so many different tire compounds, right? And IndyCar's got, they've got the red, black, and rain tire. So, but I mean, would this different tires in your spice of the sport? And Gray, Seth, would different compound tires in NASCAR spice up the sport?
No, they tried that. Tried that a couple of years ago. They went back and tried. I didn't.
They did it at the All-Star race a couple of years ago.
Yeah, the All-Star race, but to be fair, Goodyear didn't have a lot of time to test them, A, and B, they didn't get a chance to test them at night. Yeah. That being said, I think a softer compound, I don't mean a alternate compound, but one that will actually wear and create more tire strategy would spice up the racing.
Yeah. And then that would be each and every week. If you came up with a tire that did that, then you would see, just like Joey and I talked about a few minutes ago, in the IndyCar, you'd see more of an accordion effect in the field. You'd see guys go, and we saw at Homestead a situation similar to that, and how guys set their cars up. They were all on the same tires, but some guys were set up for the long run, some guys were set up for the short run, and just the way the race came. But obviously, Joey Logano's cars were set up for a short 20 to 25 lap run. The caution flew his way. He got the jump on the last restart, and with less than 20 to go, and was able to win the race. So yeah, I mean, I think any series there where you can have a tire that degrades, like Joey said, is gonna add more elements to the racing strategy and in both setup and that kind of thing. How the driver's gonna manage those tires.
I mean, I think one of the issues that Formula One does have, and I think they're addressing it next year to a certain extent with how the tires are labelled. But which ones are softer? Is it the ultra soft or the hyper soft?
Hyper soft.
Yeah, no. But to 90% of the fans, which one is it? Or is it which one's softer, ultra or hyper? Which one's bigger?
The pink one.
I know, it's crazy. I know, and I think they do need to look at it. I think the idea of the two tire compounds is a good one, but the problem is, and we've talked about this till cows come home on this show, haven't we? Really. You have in Formula One, NASCAR, IndyCar, all the racing series in the world, some of the world's leading engineers and tire simulation modelers and all these guys. And you know what? They work out pretty damn quickly what the best strategy for a tire is. So Formula One race, unless somebody's throwing a Hail Mary there, you're going to have all the top 10 starting on the same tire, all the rest of the guys starting on the same tire. You'll maybe have one or two guys throwing a complete random tire allocation on there just to make it interesting. You don't see, Hamilton and Vettel on different tire compounds because they work it out. It's not rocket science. This is what people have. They have this sort of romantic concept that racing is all magic and all this sort of stuff. But no, it's engineering, it's math, it's science. They work out what the best answer is, and then they execute to it. So it's not going to change massively. You need to create a certain amount of randomness into it. Turn around to the guys and say, okay, here's 9 sets of tires. We're not going to tell you, you've got 3 ultra soft and 6 soft. We're not going to tell you which one's which, until you put them on. I don't know, something to do.
That's hilarious,
What's curious to me
one of these tires is flat. You won't find out until it's on your car.
And we see this both we see it in NASCAR, and we see it in some of the we see it every week in NASCAR, and we see it in some of the short track IndyCar races where, here we go, we're racing along, and there's a caution flag inside 12 to 15 laps from the end. And we've seen it at Iowa where some of the guys come down pit road and get 4 fresh tires. We see it in NASCAR every week, and then they have then they, of course, there's a control restart in both Indy and NASCAR. There's not so much a control restart, in Formula One, but I'd be curious to see if they had a different restart rules, and they did have a full course caution at a Formula One race, and the top 2 or 3 cars come down pit road and put on rubber, and then have a race down pit road to get for track position at the end. I'd just be curious to see how that would do in a Formula One deal.
I'm with you there. I don't necessarily like the idea of having a full course caution because somebody's dropped a little bit of debris on turn 3 or something.
Oh yeah, Formula One's a different animal.
Yeah,
that's what I'm saying.
The one thing that I think Formula One needs to introduce, and it varies from circuit to circuit, but they need a restart zone like you have in NASCAR. You've seen at circuits, especially like Azerbaijan, where you have that really, really long drag from turn, whatever it is, 18 or 19, maybe even 20, through to the start-finish line. And the rule is that, the lead car can't pass the safety car before it gets back into spin. So they're basically juggling. All the engineers are working out when the guy can get released. Well, at some point, especially around Azerbaijan, somebody's going to get hurt there. When everybody suddenly bolts and then they suddenly got to check up because the pace car's not going quite as fast as they thought, create a restart zone. And then everybody's
need to be bunched up more, too.
Yeah, exactly. Everybody will be in the same boat then. So that's an area where I think would be greatly beneficial to Formula One.
They have a restart zone that gets the pace car safely
exactly
out of the way, and they have to run at a controlled speed and as they approach the flag stand, and then when the green comes out, then they hit the gas and go. Yeah, I agree. That would add a little bit more of an element too. And then by that time, if you did have a late race restart in Formula One, everybody's on different tire strategies anyway.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So
I got you.
So to answer Frank's question, that's what I was ready for, Frank. At the end of the day.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah.
At the end of the day, I look at this situation with IndyCar and with the black Firestone Reds and Firestone Blacks, and I'll just say this: the street and road races were brilliant this past year, and there's only a certain allotted number of tires that teams are given, and they have to just work those out themselves throughout the entire rest of the weekend. And so a lot of stuff is put on them as far as how they want to manage the weekend, practice, qualifying, so on and so forth. And because the quality of racing was so good, I don't think we need a third compound. We're not in the business of Formula One to have 50 different variations. The most exciting Formula One race that I saw, which is ironically one I was covering this past year, was United States Grand Prix, and that was for a lot of different reasons. We had rain fall in the first 2 days, so there was a lack of practice, a lack of test time, and a lack of opportunity for the cars to be set up properly. And you run into a situation where suddenly we're seeing Kimi Räikkönen go well past what was expected with crazy hot temperatures that for track temp compared to what we saw the previous 2 days. There was a lot of varied conditions that, quite frankly, the teams weren't prepared for. And when you look at that, I think that there's something to be said, maybe not necessarily about tire count and how that situation gets managed, but how about we cut back maybe more on practice time, so that way they don't have these guys 100% pinpoint accurate by the time this race starts. Let's let them work for it a little bit more. Maybe we don't give them 3.5 hours, 4 hours of track time, because when you really look at how much practice time they get, you've already run the race 3 times. And at this point, we should probably minimize that to where I would say I'm good with with 2 practice sessions that are cut in half. So instead of an hour and a half practice session in Formula One, for instance, instead of an hour and a half session, let's run 2:45s and run qualifying and go get the race. I kind of would like to see something similar like that across all disciplines of motorsport, not just Formula One. I think that it's not necessarily just about.
I agree. Yeah, we could.
Yeah. So you would look at also a situation where.
Joey, go ahead.
But you look at a situation by doing that, you save cost of fuel, you save cost of tires, you save costs for the overall weekend that helps the teams whenever you're looking at how tough the economic times are. I know that's not very much when you look at the grand scheme of things on car costs and drivers and crews, but that's a little bit that goes a long way if you're stretching NASCAR. That's 38 weekends, 40 weekends. When you go to Formula One, it's 21 weekends. And when you go to IndyCar, you're well past 18 weekends when you look at the entire month of May and how much goes on up there. So a little bit goes a long way, and I don't necessarily care about adding another tire compound. I just look maybe that there's other ways that we can make this thing even more competitive, and cutting practice time is one of them.
Yeah, but the thing is, if you cut that practice time, you've got to compact that schedule for the fan in attendance, so they're not either just wandering around the racetrack,
how many
or
fans,
fill it
how many
in.
Fans show up at how many fans do you know that show up at practice?
Well, so the fans that do need to get their money's worth. So either fill it in with support races or support practice. But my point being, Joey, is you could ditch the Friday on some of these race weekends.
Yeah.
And just do it all on Saturday, Sunday.
Yeah,
well,
I agree.
I think that's what is happening in NASCAR.
Just compact the whole weekend.
These modified weekends, they like to call them. You're going to see more and more of that. The track owners don't like it because that's fewer hot dogs and concessions and stuff they're selling. But the thing about it is they don't. They'll learn to make it work, because if nobody's going to show up for Friday anyway, it's they're going to lose money to begin with.
Yeah, I mean, they're looking at TV money more than they're looking at hot dogs. But there's only 2 things that I've seen in this world in racing that pull Friday. One of them's Carb Day, and the other one is whenever Formula One comes to town, because they go to so many different continents, so many different countries, that they're a rarity. And so everybody just wants to get as much as they can because they know it's short-lived. Those are the only 2 things I've ever seen in racing that bring people in on a Friday. Beyond that, forget about it.
I just wanted to make a quick point and sort of, I guess, disagree a little bit with you on your point about reducing track time creates closer racing. I think what happens is if you reduce track time, the only way you get through your setup work and your car evaluation is through simulation. And that's not cheap. Running simulation, running these supercomputers, running all these variables is not easy. And I think people probably don't understand quite what it's like within some of the, especially Formula One, some of these top teams. So if you take away track time, the teams that will benefit the most from that are the bigger teams, because they have the resources with these supercomputers and the engineers that do all of the simulation work. So you're going to actually create a bigger divide. If your aim of reducing track time is to make the racing more competitive, I really don't think it's going to happen. I think in a way it's going to make it worse, because you're going to play into the hands of these really, really big teams. So you almost need to give more track time to allow some of the smaller teams to get real world data that they wouldn't be able to get from simulation.
So this is just so that way I understand. So from what you're saying, simulations are cheaper than actually being at a track and having the extra, like, it's cheaper. It's more cost efficient to be at a track versus being in a simulator.
If you're already there, yes. If you're at the track, and I mean, if you turn around to a Formula One team and said, right, you could run from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. on a Friday. There's, free practices. Have at it, boys. They would pound around that track as getting as many laps as they possibly could, especially the smaller teams, because that's real data. Admittedly, if you're not going to a track, if you're saying, hey guys, we have to go to the track, and all the expense of getting there to test, then yeah, that's very, very expensive. But if you are already there, I mean, what's the cost difference for a Formula One team having a 3-day weekend compared to a 2-day weekend?
Yeah.
An extra night in a hotel, and for some of the big teams, 100 people, yeah, it's not insignificant. But when you have hundreds of millions of pounds budgets every year for some of these big teams, that's not their issue. Now, in IndyCar and NASCAR, yeah, it maybe is slightly more of an issue to spend longer at the track because the budgets are different. So, but in Formula One especially, I really can't see.
So you don't see a situation where a lack of data would give us more quality races like we had with the U.S. Grand Prix, where the lack of data and the varied conditions presented one of the better races of the year?
I think that was a one-off. I think if you if you made it the status quo and every race was like that, then these teams react very, very quickly to different set of circumstances, and they would, change the way they work to suit that. And again, the bigger teams are more capable to react that way. I think it's very, very difficult to, manipulate the racing and make it competitive when the sport is not set up to be competitive.
I would say this: if I were one of those guys that could make the decision on the F1 practice time and so on and so forth, which heaven forbid if that ever happened, but I would like to see a scenario where if we keep all the practice times the same and we keep everything the same, I want every team to have their I don't know another way to say it, test driver, development driver in FP1 across and not just select weekends. Why not every weekend? Because you're looking at guys like George Russell that need the time. Guys like, obviously, Albon at Toro Rosso definitely is going to need the time. And obviously, what's Vettel going to gain from FP1 that he can't get out of 2 and 3? If the team needs the data and things like that, I would love to see a scenario where we put all the young drivers in for FP1s across every team, top to bottom, throughout the entire grid for 21 race weekends out of the year. That's the only way that I would love to see this situation play out and continue.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah.
All right, guys.
I wouldn't disagree.
Richard wouldn't disagree. You don't hear that every day. So, but fellas, we are at the end of our show. We're at the end of our year. You may actually see us pop up a surprise show or two during our off season, but other than that, we're going to take our winter hiatus, like we like to do, and we'll be back on Who's Your Radio Network just in time for the Rolex 24. But before we go, we always like to make bold predictions for the next year. Now, we all made bold predictions for 2018 last year, and none of our bold predictions came true. So I won't even bother bringing those up again. But let's all make a bold prediction for 2019. And I'll start with you, Seth.
Okay, my bold prediction for 2019: none of the championship 4 will make it to Homestead.
Okay, well, they'll probably all make it at Homestead. They just might not be in the title fight. So,
well, that's what I meant.
But that's you. So you're saying Kyle, Martin, Kevin, and Joey will not be in the title fight. There'll be 4 different guys next year.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, that's pretty bold.
That's pretty bold.
I like that. I like that one, Seth. That's bold. Yep. Gray, one bold prediction for next year.
I'm going to say that the big 3 stay intact for another year. I think all signs right now just point to those guys continuing their dominance in the sport for the time being. I don't see anybody else. Maybe Penske being a little bit sharper, starting the season off going into 2019 than they did this year, but I still see the big 3 as the dominant forces in our sport.
Okay, so that's not quite as bold as Seth's, but it's actually totally contrary to Seth's. So you guys fight it out in the octagon. So Richard, your bold prediction for 2019.
Okay, bit of a multifaceted one here. So Leclerc beats Vettel next year. And then for 2020, Vettel is in a Mercedes alongside Lewis Hamilton.
Wow.
Okay, so
Come on, those guys have, for arch rivals, have become like best buddies the last couple of weeks.
It's kind of
It's a little bit off-putting, isn't it? Yeah, it's like, really? Something's going on there. So that wouldn't surprise me, because Bottas hasn't really done much this year, and if Leclerc does beat Vettel, Vettel won't want to stick around as he didn't with Ricciardo was there. And if that seat becomes available, I could see those two, holding hands and driving off into the sunset together.
all right, sounds good. Joey, your one bold prediction for 2019.
I don't have one. I have three. I have a triple crown.
What? Okay.
Do I get another one then?
3.
No, you don't get another one.
Joey, you get.
All right, first bold prediction.
Joey, the floor is yours.
All right, so the first bold prediction of my triple crown here is Marco Andretti is going to win the Indy 500 on the 50th anniversary of his grandfather's win. The next bold prediction is forget about Alonso's triple crown. Juan Montoya is going to win the triple crown beforehand by winning Le Mans. So that one's less bold, but still, all the attention's on Alonso, and it's slightly annoying. And the final bold prediction is that Kimi Räikkönen's going to put Sauber on the podium once in 2019.
Okay.
Okay, that's actually not quite as bold as your first two. So, but
All right, Frank.
all right. So my bold prediction is that
Brad
McLaren
Keselowski wins.
McLaren sinks a bunch of money into bringing Alonso over to do the Indy 500 and do it on their own without the help of Andretti with a Chevy engine, and Alonso gets bumped out of the field. That's my bold prediction for 2019, and I want to thank you, Gray, Joey, Richard, Seth. I want to thank the Hoobazoo Radio Network. I want to thank all you folks that listen to us on Draft and Circuits. I want to thank iHeartRadio, Spreaker, and now Audacity that all host our show. We will be back with you after our winter hiatus. Happy holidays to everybody. I hope you get some great time to spend with your families. But we're out. We will be back to talk to you shortly before the Rolex 24, but don't be surprised if we pop up in the middle of the winter with a surprise show just on a random topic. But for now, good night.
WHOOBAZOO, that's Hoobazoo.com.
Enter website, enter website, enter website, enter website.